All right, today we're opening up a genuinely remarkable piece of ancient literature, Numbers chapter 23. We're going to look at this not just as a dusty historical text, but as an absolute masterclass in narrative tension. It's this high-stakes battle of wills between two incredibly powerful figures, and it's just packed with rituals, desperation, and ultimately an immovable higher power.
How shall I curse whom God hath not cursed? I mean, just think about that question for a second. That provocative line from verse 8 establishes the central, dramatic constraint of this entire text. On one hand, we have a king demanding destruction, and on the other, a prophet who is strictly bound by an absolute divine limitation. You can literally feel the friction right from the start. The prophet just cannot simply say what the king wants to hear.
So, how is this all going to unfold? Well, here is our roadmap for this highly cyclical narrative. 1. The king and the prophet. 2. The first location. 3. God is not a man. 4. The second location. And finally, 5. The final attempt. Let's dive right in.
Okay, section 1, the king and the prophet.
To really understand this clash, we need to ground ourselves in our primary source document here, which is the King James Version. Notice the highly rhythmic, almost archaic poetic structure right out of the gate in verse 1, where Balaam says to Balak, "Build me here 7 altars, and prepare me here 7 oxen and 7 rams." This specific translation gives the whole narrative this weighty, formal, ritualistic feel that perfectly matches the actions taking place.
So, what we've got here is a complete and total stalemate. King Balak's goal is super straightforward, and it's entirely political. He demands a curse upon the people of Israel to secure his own military victory. But Balaam? Well, despite actually being hired and paid by the king, he's very clear from the text that he is bound by a divine mandate. He can only speak what God dictates. It's basically a classic case of an unstoppable political force meeting an immovable prophetic object.
Moving right along to section 2, the first location. The text outlines these incredibly meticulous, repetitive steps starting in verses 1 through 4. Step 1, go to a high place. Step 2, build exactly 7 altars. And step 3, offer a bullock and a ram on every single one of them. This exact, exhausting ritual actually drives the pacing of the whole story. The king, he does everything perfectly according to the prophet's demands. He prepares the stage flawlessly for a curse. But despite the king's incredibly careful physical preparations, God puts a completely different message into Balaam's mouth in verses 7 through 10. Balak wanted a curse, but what actually pours out of the prophet is a profound, undeniable blessing upon the people of Israel. The ritual worked. It definitely summoned a divine message, just not the one the king paid for. Let's just slow down for a second and look at the literary impact of the language used here in verse 10. Who can count the dust of Jacob and the number of the 4th part of Israel? Let me die the death of the righteous, and let my last end be like his. I mean, wow. The imagery of the dust of Jacob implies a multitude so vast they literally cannot be numbered. Far from cursing them, Balaam is out here actually wishing to share in their righteous fate. It's just a stunning reversal of expectations. Which brings us to section 3. God is not a man.
At this point, King Balak is, as you can imagine, incredibly frustrated. So we see a frantic change in strategy in verse 13. Balak says, "Come, I pray thee, with me unto another place, from whence thou mayest see them." He moves Balaam to the field of Zophim, to the top of Pisgah. Balaam's logic here is entirely human, and honestly a bit desperate. He figures if the first mountain didn't yield the right result, well, maybe changing the scenery will somehow change the divine verdict. So they rebuild the 7 altars, and they offer the bullocks and rams all over again, desperately hoping for a different answer. But then Balaam just drops this absolutely thunderous line from verse 19. God is not a man that he should lie, neither the son of man that he should repent. Hath he said, and shall he not do it? Or hath he spoken, and shall he not make it good? This passage firmly and completely shuts down Balak's hope of changing the prophecy. The text highlights this stark contrast, right? Humanity is fickle. We change our minds based on a new location or a bribe, but the divine will is depicted as constant and totally unchanging. And this brilliantly illustrates how the text elevates the status of these blessed people. In verse 22, it says, God brought them out of Egypt. He hath, as it were, the strength of a unicorn. The King James Version uses this striking mythical imagery of the unicorn, representing this untamable, phenomenal strength to describe the divine force backing Israel.
It makes it crystal clear to Balak that trying to enchant or use divination against these people, it's entirely useless.
All right, section 4, the second location.
So now Balak's frustration just completely boils over. In verse 25, he goes from demanding a curse to essentially begging for silence. He tells him neither curse them at all nor bless them at all. Basically, just stop talking. But Balaam replies in verse 26, reminding the king, "Told not I thee, saying, all that the Lord speaketh, that I must do?" This perfectly illustrates the shifting power dynamic. The human king, with all of his wealth and all his authority, is rendered utterly powerless in the face of the prophet's obedience to his divine constraint.
Finally, section 5, the final attempt. Despite being explicitly told that God does not change his mind, human desperation pushes Balak to try just one more time. In verse 28, the king brings Balaam to a third location, the top of Peor, looking toward Jeshimon. It is a desperate final gamble. And what does Balaam say? Verse 29, build me here 7 altars, and prepare me here 7 bullocks and 7 rams. And so, the whole exhausting cycle begins anew.
When you step back and actually lay out the data, this rule of 3 at work in ancient storytelling becomes incredibly obvious. First location, 7 altars, oxen, rams, results in a blessing. Second location, exact same inputs, results in an even stronger blessing. And now, here at the third location, they are doing the exact same preparation again. The text uses this intensely repetitive structure to really hammer home the complete futility of human resistance against divine will. You can see the pattern clearly laid out. The input remains the exact same, so the output is pretty much guaranteed.
Which leaves us with this final lingering thought. When you look at the entire cycle of Numbers 23, you really have to ask yourself, does repeating the exact same action ever change an inevitable outcome? Balak certainly hoped so, dragging everyone from mountain to mountain. And honestly, it's a trap of human nature we still fall into today. This text so brilliantly explores the limits of human power, and I really hope this explainer leaves you hungry to dive back into these ancient texts, to see what other structural masterpieces are just hiding in plain sight.